What's up again, everybody? We are mere days away from the beginning of the next Pro Tour. Pro Tour Lille is fast approaching, and this meta is going to make it perhaps the best event to watch that we've had for Flesh and Blood. This is going to be an absolutely incredible tournament, and I cannot wait. So today in this video, we are going to predict the meta of Classic Constructed based on the previous few results that we've come across and had as far as high-level tournaments are concerned. So if you didn't know, we just had the Calling Singapore, which was Classic Constructed. It was a mixed format as well, draft and Classic Constructed, and it was incredibly varied. And it was, spoiler alert, won by Wombat Dash, which is hilarious and awesome. We also had Battle Hardened Portland that was picked up by a Viserai player named Dexter Canwright, and I made a video with him. In fact, I released it literally yesterday. So if you'd like to see his deck list, he went undefeated on the day. Feel free to check out his thoughts on Viserai on the yesterday's video. Using those finishes and what we know about the meta and how it's evolved since the Stubby Hammerer's ban, let's try to predict it out all the way through. We're going to do a traditional tier list this time. It's going to be a blast. We got the S tier. These are decks that have a very good shot of just straight up winning. These are decks that can win, probably should win. I think here's the interesting thing about this meta, and it's kind of going to make this interesting, this whole process. So one of the hallmarks of this meta is that if you're really good on your deck and your deck is well equipped and well built for the other matchups within this meta, then there's a variety of decks you could actually just straight up win on. So this is like strictly highest power level in my mind, S tier. A tier can still straight up win and very well can just steal the tournament if people aren't prepared for it or don't know how to play it, or if someone just runs hot. Okay, B tier, these are decks that are a bit of a dark horse in the meta, maybe can just get there, get it done, could sit in the top 8, could cut their way in the top 8, but maybe not as well. The power level either comes down or it has some very distinctly bad matchups. C tier, these are decks that are gonna struggle, but you can bring to a tournament and try your hand at. It's decks that I don't want to say like the Azalea tier anymore, because really Azalea got her first living legend points, not in Classic Constructed, but in Blitz. I don't want to say that necessarily. I feel like these are just the underpowered decks right now, perhaps underserved. You probably shouldn't take them, but if you did and you're really good, you could pick up some wins with this, and maybe even do pretty well. And then finally, we do have Azalea tier. I can't do that. I can't do that to people. Azalea is on the rise, maybe. So we'll just call this the tier that you probably shouldn't bring this hero, because if you're going to try and place in one of those top finishes to win some amount of money, then you probably don't want to pick up these heroes. So we're going to start, and we're just going to go through it. And it's kind of interesting because these are put together by set. So for example, if we start over here, we have Oldham first, and it's kind of interesting to start in just a random spot because you really have to just give your opinions, and that's what we're going to do. Oldham, I think Oldham sits nicely here. And the reason he sits right there in the middle is because he does have distinctly bad matchups in the form of like Prism. I don't think Prism is obviously is just a horrible matchup for him, but he does have some stuff going for him. He can play into like the Briars of the world. They can still just roll him though. He can play into like the Viserais of the world. They can still just roll him though if they know how to play their strategy and if they know how to push their tempo. I feel like they can come out on top, but at the same time, he does have play into them, simply because he's got disruption and he's got the all-powerful, I'm just going to block you until you die. So I do think he's one of those heroes that's just straight up solid. Like, we could rename this as solid tier. We could rename these as like win tier. And we could rename these as like could also win. Like, there you go. Like this, you can top 8 with Oldham. I just want to point this out. Like, that is not putting him in the B tier, or this. Yeah, this was the B tier. Putting him in the B tier does not make him a bad hero at all. It just means that because of, well, in this case specifically Prism, and also these aggro decks are just very spiky. Because of those, you have to be a good pilot in order to get to this point. So that's where I feel he is. Lexi right now has, in my opinion, just kind of proven that she's She's not got it right now. Or if she does, she hasn't shown it yet. And that could be the really interesting thing. Maybe she's a dark horse deck. Maybe she's up here. But right now, she just hasn't proven it at any point in like these upper level events. And so for me, she sits down here. She has tools at her disposal. That's the interesting thing. She has access to some of the ice cards that were printed, the disruptive cards that were printed in Uprising. She's always got like the power curve of just like dropping Art of War and, you know, like drawing a bunch of cards off of that and giving it all buffs with Rain Razors, drawing cards off 3 of a kind. She has all of those tools. But fundamentally, when we talk about Rangers, we come up to the problem wherein they have to fire their arrows from their arsenal, and that is an extreme hampering. It reminds me a lot of Bolton and the charge mechanic. There's a distinct downside to not being able to just play a non-attack, or play an attack action just straight up from your hand. Having to go through an extra step is the difficulty. So for me, I feel like she's just sitting here at the probably don't bring it tier. Let's call it that. The probably don't bring it, or better be good. Let's do that. That's even better. Better be good. Cool. There you go. Better be good. I don't know why it did that. Why is it way over there? So better be goo. That'll center it. Okay, next up we have Briar. And this is an interesting one because Briar at the Calling Singapore represented 4 out of the top 8 in that top 8. And that's a huge percentage. And there were maybe it was 20 less. Not quite less than half of the number of Viserais that there were at the tournament for Briar. But there were significantly less Briar, and their conversion to those top tables far higher than Viserai. And that's very interesting. And so for me, that positions her quite well here. Now, it's interesting because she's always been teetering towards this top. Like if you go and look pre-Stubby Hammerer's ban, when I made a previous, like it was like a post Road to Nationals tier list. If you look at that, she was still up here. But this back and forth between her and Viserai is very fascinating. And it's interesting because there's been a lot of people that have shifted to Viserai, off of Briar and to Viserai for these previous tournaments. And it could be representative, the finishes here could be representative of player skill on that deck. Maybe if people all swapped to Viserai, it's a little bit more unfamiliar. They make a few more mistakes that you probably shouldn't make on the deck that could be more complicated. Right? So it could be that. It could also be that if you can just high roll and find those channel mount heroics, the power level of a channel mount heroic just too much to deal with for a lot of the other decks. Can just outvalue a lot of those aggro decks. So right now she is currently, before we place any of these other heroes, currently sitting in the win tier. You can win with her straight up. And in fact, you're probably going to see her at Pro Tour Lille. Icelander. I started the Road to Nationals season with Icelander being A tier. That is where I began, and I should adjust this now so that you can see absolutely everything, because this does seem to be clipping. There we go. I started Icelander here, and then I shifted her here. And I was thinking, she doesn't feel great, because I played a bunch of her, albeit I'm probably not the best Icelander player. And of course, playing a new hero, trying to learn the ins and the outs, the disruption. And I played a lot of matchups that were already kind of bad for her. But if you're good with Icelander and Ethnic Smoke over in the Calling Singapore, I consider him one of the best Icelander players, period, end of story. If you don't know his YouTube channel, check out Ethnic Smoke on YouTube. I'll try to put his link in the comments, because sometimes I remember that, sometimes I forget. So remind me in the comments to put his link. He made it all the way to top 8, and unfortunately had to run up against a Briar who really high rolled in a good way, and then of course executed and played very well to take the win. So no disrespect towards the Briar player. But then at the same event, at the Classic Constructed Battle Hardened running at the same event, Icelander won it. And I do fundamentally think Icelander is good. And so I'm probably going to put Icelander here. The disruption is too powerful. The disruption is so good, and if you know how to play it, I think there's some real things to be had. Unfortunately, she does have some difficult matchups, and one of those difficult matchups, in my opinion, is Prism. The other ones like Dromai, and I think to some degree you can also describe like Bravo as a difficult matchup, but there's some good stuff going on there. Now we're on to Prism, and Prism goes here. But it's interesting. Prism's been falling. Prism's been falling. I feel like this always happens to Prism. A new meta hits, and you know what's easy to pick up and just crush people with? Or a Prism. Or a Prism. Okay, it's very easy to pick up and crush people with. But as people get better and better on newer decks, they start to find counterplay against Prism, and Prism starts to slip a little bit. Now, it could just be representative player skill again. Maybe the players that are picking up Prism or playing Prism right now, maybe they haven't put as much time in as like diehard Prism players. Maybe diehard Prism players just wanted a break. Maybe people expected that Prism wouldn't even be involved in this season, so they just put the deck down for a while and now they're picking it back up. Could be. But right now Prism is slipping, and so let's represent that. Let's represent that. Prism just as easily can be put up here, but let's represent the fact that Prism is coming down in power level. Boltyn. All right. Levia. Levia is interesting. Okay, we'll talk about Boltyn for a second. Unfortunately for Boltyn, he gets a tier named after him. Boltyn's tough because Boltyn is one of these heroes that is so cool on paper and has a very flavorful thematic keyword in charge that just doesn't work. It reminds me of Azalea, unfortunately. And Boltyn right here just doesn't have what it takes to really cut into a meta in a real and palpable way. You can do some great things. You can play Sabers. You can definitely play Sabers. And you can play the combo and the OTK. And it's not really quite an OTK because, you know, like it can theoretically push like upwards of 30 some odd damage. I think it can get to 40, but it's been a while since I did that math, so don't quote me on that. Unfortunately, there's no deck in the format that will really let you do that with any consistency, so you have to high roll into that early, and I just don't think you can do that. Levia, if you're Man-Sant, or perhaps a handful of other people, then this could be in the solid category because they've played it a ton. I feel like this is the perfect better be good hero. I don't know if it should go here or here. If we're predicting the Pro Tour Lille meta, we're going to put it right here because I don't think as many people will play it versus playing Lexi. But there is some playability here. There's some power level here because you can play overstated attacks after blocking with cards as well. It is like kind of what mid-range is nowadays. Like this is an example of mid-range. Kano. Kano's interesting because like you're looking, and as we build this top layer out of who I think is up there, Kano could possibly go toe-to-toe with some of these decks. The blue count in Briars are not terribly high, but they have the ability to run Shock Charmers. Now the question is, are they running Shock Charmers? If they have the space for it, are they including it? If they are, then they're probably just fine. And I think enough people have learned their lesson from the previous Pro Tour that they're probably going to find exactly one spot to put Shock Charmers in there. I think Viserai's up here, and Viserai runs more blues, like 21 blues, 22 blues. And so Viserai can pivot to 2AB most of the time. If you're really opening spots up in your equipment, you can maybe bring one extra and play AB3. But there's opportunity. There's opportunity for Kano in this, but I just don't think he's quite there. I do think you better be good if you want to play him, but I don't think he's Boltyn tier. I think you better be good if you want to play him. I think it also kind of comes down, I'll definitely put him here. It kind of comes down to how the distribution shakes out. Because if a lot of people are like, you know what, Prism is good, Prism is consistent, Prism, I know how to play it. If Prism is out there, Prism is going to kind of crush the Kanos. Okay, it's just gonna play out like that, you know. Iyslander kind of does the same thing. It may be getting to be a closer matchup, but I feel like there's always going to be a little edge given to Iyslander in that matchup. And then you compare this to some other decks that just go really fast, like Fies, for example, or Viscerai goes really fast. And so they basically just put you on the clock as soon as you possibly can. And because they're not at 20 like in Blitz, you can't count to 20 as fast as you can count. Well, you can't count to 40 as fast as you count to 20. So with that being said, I feel like you're going to have to be goo. You're going to have to be gooed. All right. Now, the reason we all showed up, Wombat Dash just won. Wombat Dash should go right here. Maybe even right here. I don't know. It actually could, like, I could see Wombat Dash, like, shifting around like this. Now, I'm saying Wombat Dash. If you don't know, Wombat Dash is the name that the community has affectionately coined for aggro dash. Dash that does not pivot, really, between a pistol and control and just aggression. This is, like, all aggression. You play Talishar as your only weapon, essentially. You could even commit as hard as playing, like, what is it? Hope Merchant's Hood in the headpiece slot. But I think the right call in this deck is to play the Crown of Providence. But either way, you could. And it's all gas, no brakes, pumping like just crazy, trying to push out max damage, playing the Thumper. And this deck, honestly, I feel like this deck could start moving up, and it's weird because, like, it's kind of it was kind of a meme deck like 4 to 6 months ago, kind of, and then like people played it in Commoner, and it was kind of a meme. Like, it's not a meme. It was kind of good in Commoner, like it's strong in Commoner, and here it is in Classic Constructed, and it just counts to 40. I mean, it reminds me of Kano. It just doesn't stop. Kano does technically allow you to block a little bit, but this is not about that life. It's not about that life. And I do think that it could be on the rise in a very real and interesting way. Will we see it at Pro Tour Lille? If we were accurately predicting the amount of the decks that we'll see at Pro Tour Lille, I think this would be down here. Why? Because I do think there is some skill into weaving together these attacks and knowing when to trigger certain effects. So if you just like wanted to pick the deck up, you probably shouldn't do it like 3 or 4 days before Lille. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Azalea, you gotta be good, but I am going to, in honor of her getting some points, I am going to call this Boltund here, and I'm going to put her ahead of Boltund. Viscerai. I still think Viscerai is probably the best deck in the format. I do. I still think it's the best deck in the format. It's funny because it's also probably more complex than Briar, and it's also probably the floor and the ceiling of a deck are very important to understand, right? So the ceiling of a Briar on any given turn is higher than the ceiling of a Viscerai, and they're pretty close actually. They're pretty close as far as damage output. The floor on a Briar, I think, is far lower to some degree than the floor on the Viscerai, as long as both heroes kind of have cards or have maintained cards that can play out some form of gameplay. Because like this can push 8 damage, like 2/4 attacks with Go Again. Okay, that can push like 8 damage. And then maybe if you have the resources to swing Thorn, okay, it pushes 10. The same thing could be said of Viscerai, like 8 damage to 12 damage, right? That's kind of the floor for both of these. The aim is this. I don't want to say floor. The aim of that deck, like the average. And so for me, they're very, very close, and they're very similar. This might have a high roll-y aspect because you're trying to find the Channel Mount Heroic. This is just more consistent in its damage. So looking at high roll versus low roll is one way to evaluate it, but looking at the consistency aspect, and that's for me in a large scale tournament, that's what I would lean towards. I think it's the best deck in the format. It's probably why it's been the most well represented. That and hype are the main reasons, but for me, that's like the thing. This is an interesting one. Okay, look. I feel as though this goes here, but honestly, it's very intriguing because like putting these two next to each other is great because they actually do have an interesting matchup into each other, and I feel like they're very close on power level. But a good Dorinthia player can just get there. Unfortunately, I do think that there are some of these decks that get there faster, and I also think that there's some of these decks that really disrupt, like this disrupts, and this can disrupt. So you could consider doing like this. And if we are just talking about like overall finishes, you'll probably get this compared to that. I would imagine this would be your finish. So I'll leave it like that. Rhinar is one of these that you better be good, and I will put Rhinar. I'm gonna put Rhinar below. I'm gonna put Rhinar above. I'm gonna put the two brutes next to each other. And honestly, Lexi could maybe even go here. I'm really down on Lexi right now, but I think Rhinar is in one of those spots that you do have to be pretty good with him. And Rhinar can just like win games that they shouldn't normally win off of the back of just weird intimidates. It's almost like a roll of the dice in that way, and that's kind of what Brute does to some degree. And you can play around mitigating that a little bit of high roll or low roll, and the RNG, you can play around it. And if you can, you better be good, and if you can do pretty well. Bravo. I'm not gonna lie, for the past week or two, I've been wanting to make this type of video because I want to talk about how I think Bravo is really good. Bravo's being really hamstringed by like this matchup, and it does have I would say a slightly unfavorable matchup into both of these aggro heroes, but I do think this, like in the hands of a good player, this deck is really good. But I am going to move it down here below Prism, and honestly you may even consider like doing a swap, because this matchup is now getting more figured out as well. But I'm going to leave it right here. I do think Bravo is actually very good, and I do think it should represent well at a large-scale tournament, but how well, that's the question. And we'll talk about why here in just one more second. Katsu. Katsu is interesting because Katsu actually had a decent finish, an almost top 8 at the Calling Singapore, and it's off of just good play and Ninja doing Ninja things. But I do think you better be good, and I do think it should sit here. This is the one I wanted to talk about. Dromai is climbing, and I think Dromai is people are starting to figure out the control Dromai aspect of just being able to block, mitigate damage, try to dance around disruptive effects, keeping an arsenal, playing said arsenal, building Ash, and then playing for the second cycle of a deck, which is almost unheard of nowadays. Like Oldhim can play for second cycle, now Dromai plays for second cycle. And so it's interesting to see these Dromai start to put up results, because Dromai is starting to overtake decks that I didn't think it could. Like, for example, Bravo. I thought Bravo was just like a really tough matchup, but it's starting to kind of just be in top 8s. People are just figuring out matchups for it. And I think this is a hero that starting to kind of feel itself. Like people are starting to figure it out, and that is really cool. And then we come to Fi. And Fi's coming down. Fi's coming down a good bit. I don't know how much I think Fi is coming down, but I do think Fi is coming down a good bit. I would probably go right here. And this looks really weird. Looking at this form and looking at this format, like looking at this, you would think this is really weird, right? If we wanted to really smooth things out, you could possibly move this down, and you could possibly move this up, but I don't believe that's true based on these titles. I don't think it's true. But what I do think is all of these heroes up here are a lot closer. Then there's a step down, and then there's these two heroes at the bottom, like pretty far down. This right here is a lot closer than a tier list makes it look. And I just want to point this out because it's very important to understand. These two heroes, I think, are the two best decks in the format. But that's not to say that they can't be usurped by any of these heroes right here. And that's not to say that, maybe these two heroes can squeak into a top 8. I could say the exact same thing about like a good player on Kano can do the exact same thing. Like an Alexander Vor, for example, could make his cut up there because he just knows the deck. Mansan on Levia could just do the exact same thing because he just knows the deck. And so this is a very interesting meta, and it's one that I would say is top heavy for all the right reasons. So let me know what you want to see happen at the Pro Tour Lille. I want to hear from you. Let me know about your thoughts on this in a comment below. If you enjoyed the video, make that number climb to a slightly larger digit. And as always, thanks for watching.